Hi everyone, Josh from the Narrate team here. This weekend, entitled Calling All Owners, Adam asked the question, is God in search of a person or a people? Adam speaks from the Bible, looking at moments in the text in which God looks to a community to fulfill his purposes.
So this morning, when I mind map, that's kind of the way I kind of compile thoughts and research and all these different things. And so on Tuesday morning, I would spend that morning kind of mind mapping everything and kind of opening up Evernote and all these Post-it notes and all this stuff and kind of getting it on my whiteboards in my office. And then Wednesday morning, I come back and I start memorizing and rehearsing and kind of reorganizing. And on Wednesday morning at about 10:30 in the morning, I realized I had an hour's worth of material this weekend. So buckle in. Totally kidding, of course. Lest I was able to trim it to 30 minutes, which is why the notes page is a little bit bulkier than it normally is, or that mind map thing. But lest what I really want to communicate this morning get lost in a caffeinated pace, let me just say it right off the bat. For those of you who are a part of making these gatherings happen, in whatever capacity that is, who over the course of the last year who have pre-decided to give some of your time to making this happen, let me just, here's the whole point of the weekend. Thank you. Thanks a lot for the work that you've put in. By now, hopefully you're asking the question, what is with 145? Is this like some kind of Christian youth group? Like, what verse is that referring to where they remove the colon? Like, that is so cool. Remember that whole thing that we do? Like, it's not at all like that. If you're wondering what it is, then hopefully that means we've accomplished a bit of a purpose. Josh and the creative team have worked really hard on developing all that this week. But here's what 145 is about. When we hired Josh as creative production leader and student teams leader in mid-June, the first project that we gave him was to figure out how many non-staff volunteer hours go into any given Sunday's worth of gatherings. We just wanted to know, like not from the 5 full-time staff, but just people who already work 50 hours a week and are already like wiping butts and changing diapers all week long, like people who are already really, really busy. How many hours does it take from people to pull off a weekend's worth of gatherings at the Grand Street Theater? And the answer was 145 hours. And so whether that's, if you've contributed to that, whether it's getting here at 6 a.m. and running a vacuum cleaner or rehearsing on Thursday with the band and then getting here again, whether you're preparing the meal for the band or teaching kids at one gathering so you can attend another, whether you're getting here early and making coffee or making coffee between services or standing on the curb and greeting people or ushering and helping people find seats, whatever capacity it is. Some of you like attend the 10 o'clock and then go home with your family and come back at 12:30 to help us tear down because we have a contract that says we have to be out of this room by 1 o'clock. That's a half an hour. So those of you that are part of that, thanks. And Vision Weekends, really, we're going to tell a lot of the great stories from that because we're going to baptize several people and some remarkable stories this year. But let me just tell you a story about a guy named Mike. Now, Mike's not his real name. That's an anonymous name. But I first met Mike when his sister emailed me this last year, I don't know, early winter, I think, asking if she'd be willing, if I'd be willing to meet with her and her brother. Now, they're both adults. She indicated that she'd been coming to Narrate for a while and had found it very helpful, kind of moderately church growing up, and then kind of fell away from all that and somehow found Narrate, and that was helpful. And her brother had come on some really difficult times. Seemed like he was in a pretty unhealthy relationship. That had come to an end, and it was just dark in his world. She asked if we'd meet, and I was like, I'll let you down. Like, I'm not your guy. I'm not your counselor. I'm the guy who spends all week just memorizing 30 minutes. That's what I can do. That's not me. She assured me that he was seeing a professional counselor, and so then I was like, yeah, let's meet. And so I don't know whether it was a few days later, we met at the office, and I did my best to do 2 things that I'm terrible at, empathize and listen. And I just sat in this room and tried to do both of those things and listened to a guy who had just had the rug taken out from under him, who God wasn't the issue for him, but pretty apparent that like a living Jesus who guides and directs on a daily basis was at best distant to him. We had about a 5-minute conversation at the end where I sent him out the door with this Gospel of John, and I just said, I don't think it does you any good for me to cram Jesus down your throat and tell you what I think, but I do think it does us all good to pick up the Gospels for ourselves and familiarize ourselves with Jesus as represented to us by the text, not by people like myself. And you walk away from a meeting like that, and you just don't know. Following Sunday, there's Mike's sister, who I now knew, and there's Mike. Next Sunday, there's Mike's sister. There's Mike. Next Sunday, Mike's sister's in one gathering, no Mike. And I thought, oh, bummer. Next gathering, there's Mike. There's a friend. Next weekend, there's Mike. There's a friend. There's another friend. Somewhere in the midst of that, I lost track. Because, that's what I do is I sit up here and I figure out who's at church and who's not. And then that's what I spend my week doing is figuring out. What I can tell you is he's here most weeks, and actually he's a part of our Sunday teams now. His sister moved here a couple of months ago, and she came up to me after the gathering in tears, and she was saying, thank you. And basically what she said is, I can leave town now feeling good about where my brother's at because he's in a completely different place. So listen, whether you run a vacuum cleaner or you hit keys on a keyboard, whether you're making coffee, whatever it is, what's not lost on me is this isn't about sermons. And it's not about songs. It's not about any single individual thing. What we're trying to do is create for people an experience. And it takes about 145 hours to do that. And so really I have this single agenda. That's just to say thank you. That we had our first ever Vision Weekend in this room way back in 2010. There was a heap of questions that happened in that first year of our being a church where people were asking, like, how do we be a member? How do we be a member? How do we be a member? And I was like, I don't know. I don't even understand what membership is. I wasn't raised in church. I don't even understand what the point of church membership is. Like, I'm not a member of anything, and except for the Narrate. Just kidding. I'm not even a member of that. I don't even know what that, I don't know if that's a good joke or a bad joke, but I thought it was good. And so we made a decision. We said, we're not going to have members. We're going to have owners. Because our understanding is that membership is about privilege and ownership is about responsibility. And we think that the makeup of people who are going to like being a part of this movement are people who understand that a party is a lot more fun when you have a job to do. And so thanks. You know what else I love about this 145 number? Is it reminds me of what I'm going to suggest is the second most important question any of us can ever ask. Especially for those of you, and listen, I understand if you're a guest and you don't follow Jesus, this is kind of a weird weekend to be here, and I think we can salvage it in the end, but unapologetically, this is about us going like, thanks to the people who make this experience a positive one for you, even though you hate church. Like, that's what we have in common. We don't necessarily love some of the dynamics either, and so there's lots of people who do follow Jesus who work hard for that, and so this morning we're working to thank them. If you follow Jesus, I think maybe the second most important question you can ever ask, short of like, who am I going to follow, if that's the most important, is the second question, and that is God in pursuit of a person or a people? And I know it looks like I have an agenda with that question because of where I work, but like you, I also had to work through that question at one point in my journey, and like you, my family was kind of going like, I don't know, like Sunday morning, is it really essential? I look back on my 20s and go, the question that captures that whole decade of my life is this question. Because the implications, I think, are uncomfortable. Listen to Genesis chapter 1. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. It begs the question, is your understanding of God that we find in the text, is he in pursuit of a person or a people? And the implications of what you do with the implications of that question are huge. Go to maybe the most important chapter in the entire Bible. I don't know if I even have I shouldn't even say that. I have no credibility, but I think it's a big one. Genesis 12. The Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household, and you and I are going to live in the desert together. It's not what he says. And go to the land I will show you, where you and I will live. No, he goes on. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I'll make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Does this sound to you like a God who is interested in an individual and in individualized experiences between people and God? Or does this sound to you like a God who, for some reasons that we can't entirely even fathom or appreciate, but are invited to trust, invites us to live out our faith in the context of a people? Like, was this about Abram? Or was this about Abram being a part of something bigger than himself? I think the implications are huge. Jesus, he weighs in on this in what is the greatest sermon ever recited, and in a passage made famous by people in black and white clothes standing on the shores of Maryland next to pumpkins. Jesus says this, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. What's often lost on us is the Greek language has plural you. We don't. We have singular you. Does this sound to you like Jesus' vision was for a bunch of individual lights? Or was he looking for a person or a people? Listen, I don't think I can even answer that for you. But what I can say is what 145 hours tells me is that there's a bunch of people around here who have this deep-seated conviction that a relationship with Christ is something that's supposed to be lived out in the context of community. And to that I say, not even thank you. I say, good job. That's the hard path with God. Well done. There's this couple that approached me this last winter, and they, you know how you can just tell when people are excited, and so they come up to me, they caught me right over here by this heat register, and they just had this look in their eye, and they started to tell me, Adam, we got to tell you this story. So they said, and I'll try to keep this anonymous. So one of them has a coworker who doesn't just not believe, but doesn't like God and is kind of antagonistic towards God and church and all things in those directions. But their wife, that coworker's wife, started coming to Narrate. And then they were excited. They were like, and then we noticed a few weeks ago, like she's bringing him. I was like, that's awesome. Wow, that's what we work so hard for. Like, can't wait to tell the team that. Like, that's why they get up at 5 a.m. on Sunday morning. That's the only day they can sleep in. So like, no, that's not the whole story, they said. Because I'm such a good listener, you know. They got halfway through it, and I'm celebrating. They said, we knew this weekend that she was out of town. And he was sitting in the front row of the balcony. The implications, again, like, and I don't have to draw it out. They're like, we thought he was getting drugged here by his earlobe. Turns out he, I guess, wants to be here. Thanks for helping create those experiences. You know, this last year, we turned 5 on Vision Weekend, and so there was this part of me, and I alluded to this even last week with the whole desire to do some coaching. And I just wanted to subject us to some outside opinion because I've watched cyclically that there's ruts that you get caught in, and I just wanted to make sure that we were understanding changes that need to be made and all those different things. And so I wanted to subject us to the type of thing that men do when they're 50, if you know what I mean, like the poking and prodding. That really, like, I thought that was a good one. Like, come on, because you guys are all so young. You're like, what happens to me when I'm 50? So we had Stan Simmons, this renowned leader from our own state, from Billings, not the church that planted this one, a church where I started following Jesus. He had recently retired, and some of you remember this. We had him here in February, and he just came as a consultant. He just observed. I thought I had to preach to him once. I had to preach to him 3 times. He was in the kids area. He was everywhere, just kind of observing. It was worse than Christmas Eve for the staff. Like we were, as one of my friends says, we were wound like a, 10-day clock. I mean, we were just, it was so intense and so intimidating. Afterwards, I went out to lunch with Stan, my wife and I, and he looked across the table and he asked, and I should have known it. Like I should have known. He looked at me and he said, Adam, speaking of this next question, do you hear the creaky floor? He said, so Adam, when are you going to build a building? And I said, well, if I had $1 for every time someone told me that, I'd build like 10 of them. Just kidding. He said, so when are you going to build a building? And I listen, I'm not judgmental towards buildings, but there's this thing that we've had from the very beginning of like, what if we never did? And there's these advantages we think of not having. And so but it's also hard to say that to a guy who just built a $30 million building before he retired. So it was a very uncomfortable conversation. And he wasn't here to subject his will on us. It wasn't like that at all. He'll be back actually in November. Can't wait. He's one of our biggest fans, biggest cheerleaders. And so we worked through that. And then a little bit later, he paid, it was one of the highest compliments I've ever received. He said, Adam, I think the question you have to ask is how big do you want this thing to get? That's kind of a weird question, and maybe that even grosses you out that I would say it from here. And he said, Adam, he just said, Adam, that everything's in place, the talent's in place, the people's in place, the needs, everything, you have everything in, there's nobody who's doing anything that you're doing better than what you're doing it. The talent is here, he said. This thing can get as big as you care for it to get. So I think you need to spend some time asking yourself, how big do you want this thing to get? And I think in looking back, that was the 50-year-old question that I was looking for. And we spent a bunch of time on it. I've talked through with many of you. I've spent a lot of time in my own head. We've talked about it amongst council because it can be a gross question, but it's also a very honest question. And part of what I realized in working through that is we've never really thought in terms of size. We've always thought in terms of progress. Like I think healthy things grow. I think a plant that doesn't ever grow a new leaf is a dying plant, right? So we've always thought in terms of, it's not like what size can we get to? It's like, can we over the course of our lifetime lead an organization that continues to grow? And then can we even hand off at some point an organization to some new leaders that's not dying, but that's growing? That's why I respect Stan. His leadership defies odds, because he didn't grow a church from 20 to 5,000 in 2 years. That happens all the time. He grew a church from 20 to 5,000, not even necessarily my goal, by the way, our goal, over 30 years. Start a business that's amazing, run it for a year, easy. Start a business that stays amazing, run it for 30 years, hard, right? I just realized we've never thought. We've always just thought in terms of progress. And the other thing is we've always thought in terms of culture. It's never been about size. It's about can we be the kind of church that puts a cow on the stage and no one gets mad? I don't know. Just wondering. It reminded me of a conversation I had way back at Harvest. There was this incredibly intelligent theologian on staff there, and he and I would have a lot of fun wrestling things to the ground together because he went to Dallas and I went to Portland, and so there's a kind of a dynamic there in the church world. And we had a fun relationship, and he stopped me one time in the hall. I don't even remember what we were talking about. I can take you to where I was. And I just remember saying to him, I must have been out of bullets because he was way more intelligent than me. And I said, I guess the way I could explain this whole Narrate experiment to you is we're just wondering, what if we were this kind of church? We don't know what size it would be. We don't know if it would be 12 of us or more. But what if we could be this kind of church? And would that even be possible? Well, I say all that to say that as I work through this process with Stan, what I realize is if you were to start trying to rank on the chart of what parts of our culture are non-negotiable, which parts of our church, or maybe better said, which parts of our culture contribute most to who we are, the irony comes out, because I'm going to argue portability is at the very top of what makes us us, if we're going to fight for culture. And I think this is a question many of us are asking, okay, we're growing, so when do we lose our soul? That's kind of what we expect. If we're going to maintain culture and not allow growth that culture happens not despite growth, that didn't make any sense. Let's just delete that line. Portability is a huge part of that. We've been working on a document for years. It's this ever-changing document. It took me back that we call our recipes. It was a Jim Collins-inspired thing. Let me just kind of power through, caffeinated style, what our recipes are. Number one, this is my understanding, and I'd love to hear your thoughts via email or lunch or something if you had them. Number one, if you were to say, what's our culture? I'm going to put it right at the top of the list. Stay portable. It elicits buy-in. Number two, meet in public space. It's safe and provides opportunities to network and matter and serve. Number three, teach with questions. They make us real and approachable. Number four, connect via serving. Sunday teams and scattering ops. Number five, just had someone ask me this week, so when are you moving to the Valley? Number five, stay downtown. Number six, create Sunday experience that unchurched people enjoy. And try to find churched people who aren't asking us to keep them happy, I would add. Number seven, scatter monthly. Matter for the common good. Number eight, live with a high view of people. Number nine, network, collaborate, and scatter with individuals and organizations from different and unlikely sectors. Here's the catch in all of that. To be a church that scatters requires 145 hours of volunteer energy. Thank you. I think, and what I actually said to Stan, I think someone hears the sermon and interacts with Jesus differently if they ran a vacuum cleaner that morning. I think the buy-in that happens when you stand in the lobby and greet people, when you make coffee, I think it's not just about Helena, it's about the individual soul. And so thanks for trusting us in that. And with that, I do, because I know you're a busy bunch. And the other thing that occurs to me before we transition here is, I think I'll know, quite honestly. And I don't say this manipulatively. I don't say this out of fear. I just say this out of like the deepest part of my soul. I think I'll know when and if God is done with whatever it is he's trying to do with my pea brain and our little tribe. And I think we'll know that when all of a sudden nobody wants to usher. And 6 a.m. is too early. And being here till 1:15 is too late. And we can't find another keyboardist. And nobody wants to make coffee. And no one cares if there's a popcorn crumb in between the chairs, because no one can get the vision of that's just showing respect for our guests. I think we'll know. And I think what 145 hours says is, not yet. And so thanks. But I do have a challenge that I'd like to bring to you, because I also know that you're a busy bunch. Like that's who we are. And there is one question that is, I've kind of been thinking about calling all owners and thinking about it for months. Like I start thinking about next one tomorrow. There's been this kind of dual thing, and generally I would just go like, there's can only be one point in a message, but there's a second one that I think we have to dive into for just a moment. This last year, I got to start getting to know this guy, and we were having lunch at one point. He's become a friend, and we were sitting across the table with the windbag having lunch, and I learned that he worked for the IRS. And I was like, wait a minute. And I can't remember who said it first. I'm just going to take credit for it. We had this moment of like, wait a minute. So like, when you meet people, like you kind of start getting to know them, and they kind of want to have your family over for dinner and kind of get to know you. And then they figure out what you do for a living, and they're like, whoa. Like, is that your experience? Like they kind of get weirded out, and suddenly like, don't say shit around him because he works for the IRS. Like, do you have that dynamic that goes on in your life? It's like, yeah. I was like, we should be friends because I have the same problem. Like, I was thinking to myself this week, one of my other good friends is a used car salesman. Like, how coincidental, right? Like, we got all these. So, you know, if you're a thief or something, I should be your friend. I'm not saying they are. I'm saying that's me. So we had this incredible interaction, but it's also born of some frustration because I'm sorry if the S word is offensive to you, but that's the reality of my life. Like I go to my boys' baseball game, and there's like, that's the pastor's kid over there, like, and the whole thing it's so weird, And there's like, no, you can cuss around me, like I don't have virgin ears, it's okay. And I realized something this summer, that what I wish people who didn't understand me, and listen, I don't think this is just me, because you work with people and they know you go to church and you have the same freaky dynamic. What I wish people understood is where there's affinity, it has more to do with growth than it does anything else. I mean, what would you rather hang out with? A person who believes in God and isn't at all interested in growing as a person, a business person, a spouse, a father, a mother? Would you rather hang out with a Christian who's like, my job is to stay Christian? Or someone who frankly does not believe in God, but is devouring books on leadership and personal growth and is earnestly sincere to understand how they could have better character? It's kind of a no-brainer, isn't it? That's what I wish people understood about us. I'm going to argue, we almost did a whole like what the what kind of sermon, like what's our context, that if there's an affinity, yeah, I hope it's Jesus and I hope people meet him here. Yes, I think it's the most important question in the entire world. But no, I don't think we have to agree on that topic in order to have relationship, because I think if there's one non-negotiable where we can't connect, if it's not there, it's this passion to grow. And thus we have to deal with, when does 145 come in conflict with your desire to grow? Because you can become so busy that you don't have time to sit in a chair and listen to God and go, you know, you probably shouldn't have said that yesterday. And you can become so busy that you don't have space for the Holy Spirit to whisper into your ear, and yeah, it's not audible, and yeah, that's why it's kind of weird, and that's why it's called faith. And you don't have space to read the text and read a verse that goes, oh, wow, I needed that. There's no space for the rebuking, for the encouragement, for any of it. You know, what I love about Calling All Owners is one of the wins for me is to communicate. Listen, you cannot be a part of a Sunday team. That's fine. We're not going to shame you. We're not going to mark you with any kind of brand. That's just fine. There's a bunch of us who will continue to work. But please don't avoid getting involved with Sunday morning because you think you're any busier than anybody who is. Because I have a friend who says, if you want to get something done, ask somebody who's already busy. There's a tension there. And it's a tension that Paul, quite honestly, he saw coming. He was building into and leading this young guy named Timothy. And he said to Timothy, as he was just imparting these truths to Timothy, he warned Timothy, be careful. Don't get distracted. See, here maybe is the question before we jump into this. Are you remembering, go ahead to that next slide, that what you get from life is who you become? And that what God gets from your life is who you become? I don't think that happens in tension with in spite of busyness, but there's certainly a tension there, isn't there? It's not that people who are less busy or by default have better character. It's that people who are busy are also mindful of character. Paul says to Timothy, but godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Listen, we've talked. God is not anti-wealth. He's not anti-profit. He's not anti any of those things. What he's saying to Timothy here is be careful, because if you're not careful, task becomes the goal, not people. It's not just about vacuuming a carpet. It's about believing that in the process of doing so, we hear from God better and our character is transformed. And listen to what Paul says to Timothy. But you, man of God, woman of God, flee from all this. What's the this? It's the busyness that causes us to neglect character and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, endurance, and gentleness. Now, here's about 20 minutes that hit the production floor on that notes page. I've read through this like you have a million times. You read these words. You start unpacking what Paul is saying in these words, and there's actually 3 different categories that he's unpacking here of character. You could meditate on these in your quiet time all week. Paul's saying, hey, let's not forget the kingdom of God. It's not about songs, and it's not about sermons, and it's not about coffee, and it's not about clean carpet, and it's not about kids, and it's not about ushering, it's not about greeting, it's not about any of that stuff. It's about a renewed character in which a person and a people become outposts of the kingdom of God, where people step into and experience the kingdom of God by stepping into and experiencing your sphere. Take hold, fight the good fight of the faith. Take hold of the eternal life to which you were called when you made your good confession in the presence of many witnesses. Notice that Paul's understanding of eternal life is not a day where we raise our hand. That yes, there's salvation that comes with the cross. But notice he uses fight language. That becoming a person of character, that doesn't happen without intentionality. That creating the space for God to do that. Getting busy, you're the type who had modeled to you a work ethic. Getting busy is probably never going to be your issue. Are you allowing God to use the busyness as a tool to create conversations that sharpen your character? Watching my boys fall in love with sports, the phrase that has become so clear to me over and over this summer is, listen, baseball is not an end unto itself. It's only useful to the degree that it teaches you how to set goals and accomplish them and become a different kind of person. And let me be the first to say, every hour of the 145 is not an end unto itself. But it is a tool. And we've organized ourselves around the idea that God disciples us best when we put our hands into the soil and work and serve people. So if you're part of the 145, thank you. Would you grab that card in front of you? I just want to take 30 seconds because this isn't a beg weekend. Some of you who are a part of the 145, let me just be the first to go, man, if you need to shift, then shift. What you see there is a list of every opportunity as it exists on Sunday morning right now. A little tiny number represents the number of people needed. And again, this weekend's about thanks. And for those of you who have been sitting there maybe for years, and you're kind of going like, I think it's time to get involved. I kind of want to get involved. I kind of want to meet somebody. They don't do small groups, but I guess we better serve. I guess they actually mean what they say on that one. This is a great way to do that. I know you're going like, well, I know I'm going to take this home and I'm going to pray about it. We've prayed. And probably so have you for months and months and months and months and months. Listen, if you've fallen in love with this, it's because somebody else who works 50 hours a week and has kids and has responsibilities and is doing things and can't really justify giving up 2 Sundays a month has done that for you. And so the invitation is come do that with us. Next Sunday, we're not going to have gatherings. Part of that is to say to the 145, we want everybody to have the weekend off because we understand you're tired, and that was a long journey we're just finishing up. Part of it is so that the staff can focus entirely next week on connecting with those of you who are going, yeah, I think I'd like to figure out how to run sound. Never ran sound before, but I'd love to do that. I can drum, just never considered drumming here. I can teach kids. So there'll be a bin as you go. You can drop that in there. But seriously, thanks. And I don't know if there'll be a year 10, but I know there'll be a year 7 because there's these vested people.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.